So good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in this discussion panel and discussions. My name is William Cheung. I'm a professor and the director of the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries at the University of British Columbia. I'm also one of the principal investigators of the Ocean Canada Partnership that you will hear more about in this section. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UBC's Pond Grey campus, where I am now situated, is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. As we gather here to discuss this vital topic of our oceans, it is really important for us to recognize and honor the indigenous people who have been the stewards of this land and oceans for millennia. Their knowledge and deep connections to the marine environments are integral to the conversations we are having today, as you will hear more in today's session. I will encourage all of you also who are participating in this event to reflect on the history and relationship between you and the land that you are currently residing on. So today we are here to celebrate the launch of a book that is a timely and necessary product of a partnership. The book is called Sea Change, Charting a Sustainable Future for Oceans in Canada. You will hear much more about the book. And this book brings together a diverse group of voices, scientists, indigenous leaders, policymakers, and community members to explore the pressing challenges facing our oceans and the pathway to a sustainable future. As you know, our oceans are at a crossroad. They are changing at an unprecedented rate due to climate change, overfishing, pollution, and habitat destruction. This book does not only present the problem, it offers solutions grounded in scientific research, indigenous knowledge, and in innovative policy approaches. And all of these interdisciplinary approaches, diverse perspective, are also reflected in today's panel, who are going to give you a summary view of this book. We are privileged to hear from some of the leading voices who have contributed to this book. They present a breadth of knowledge and experience, bringing together diverse perspective on how we can chart a sustainable course for our oceans. So let me first introduce them to you, and then after that, they will give their perspective about the book. First of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Rashid Somaila. Professor Somaila is a renowned professor at the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries and the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC. He is also a Canada Research Chair in Interdisciplinary Ocean and Fisheries Economics. He directs the Ocean Canada Partnership that he will explain more later. His work on fishery economics are groundbreaking, and his insights have made immense impact on global policy debates, and he has been a tireless advocate for the equitable and sustainable use of marine resources. Dr. Somaila will introduce the overall context of the book as well as the Ocean Canada Partnership. Next, we have Chief Russ Jones. Although Chief Jones could not present in person, but he has really kindly prepared a video that will show you later. Chief Jones is a respected leader of the Haida Nations and a lifelong advocate for the conservation of marine ecosystems. As a biologist and traditional knowledge holder and rights holder, Chief Jones brings a unique perspective that bridges science and indigenous wisdom. His leadership in marine planning and initiatives such as Protect the Great Barrier Sea really demonstrate the importance of indigenous governance and stewardship in achieving sustainable ocean management. Next, we will have Dr. Megan Bailey. Dr. Bailey is an associate professor at Dalhousie University and holds a Canada Research Chair in Integrated Ocean and Coastal Governance. Her research focuses on the intersections of marine resource management, policy, and community well-being. Dr. Bailey's work is particularly relevant to small-scale fisheries and the socioeconomic aspect of ocean governance, highlighting the need for an inclusive approach to ocean sustainability that considers human dimensions. Dr. Bailey will discuss the access part of the book. We will then have Dr. Derek Armitage. Dr. Armitage is a professor and director at the School of Environment, Resources and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo. He is a leading scholar in environmental governance, with a focus on the adaptive management of marine and coastal systems. His work emphasizes the importance of social ecological resilience and the need of governance systems that are flexible, participatory, and adaptive in the face of change. His contributions to the field help us understand how we can navigate the complexities of ocean management in a rapidly changing world. He will discuss the governance part of the book. Then we will have Dr. Nadia Steiner. She is a research scientist with Fisheries and Ocean Canada and an adjunct professor at the University of Victoria. She is an expert in ocean modeling and biogeochemical processes. Her work focuses on understanding the impacts of climate change on marine ecosystems, particularly in polar regions. Dr. Steiner's research on ocean acidification and sea ice dynamics provide critical insights into how these changes are affecting marine life and what this means for the future of ocean health and fisheries. She will give a government researcher's perspective of the book. And last but not least, we have Dr. Evan Andrews. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the Ocean Frontier Institute and the Memorial University's Department of Geography. His work specializes in marine socio-ecological systems. His research examines the intersections between human activities and marine ecosystems with a focus on community-based conservation and co-management of marine resources. Dr. Andrews brings a fresh perspective on how local communities can play a central role in ocean stewardship, emphasizing the importance of collaboration and knowledge sharing. He will give an early career researcher's perspective of the book. Together, these speakers represent the interdisciplinary and collaborative approach that is at the heart of this book. So without further ado, we would like to show you a video that introduces the Ocean Calendar Partnership. So I will pass this to Duncan.
About 10 years ago, I did a similar interview, very short video, where we launched the Ocean Canada Partnership project, which was funded by SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And we embarked on a very ambitious, with ambitious goals where we were aiming to conduct research, co-create research in a partnership and interdisciplinary way to kind of support Canada's effort to manage its oceans and fisheries sustainably for the benefit of Indigenous people, coastal communities, and the population of Canada at large. And it's 10 years now, amazingly. Essentially, we've completed the project. We have been amazingly productive. We've produced several papers in journals, close to about 500 if you count our core and our related publications. We've given presentations all over the world. I think more than 400 appeared on TV, in newspapers, carrying the message to Canadians who can decide to use the information the way they wish. But at least we make the information available. So this has been an amazing journey, and we've come so far. And this is not the end of it. As part of our effort, we have created Ocean Nigeria and Ocean Malaysia and also Ocean Asia as ideas coming from Ocean Canada. I describe that as the gift of Canada, Canadian research to the world. So this keeps being replicated. And this year, we published our book, which is called Sea Change, and that's an interdisciplinary collection of 15 chapters with about 50 co-authors talking about all aspects of Canada's oceans, from the ecology to the people, to the economics, institutional issues, climate change, obviously, Indigenous management, and reconciliation. Really comprehensive collection of books, of ideas that we put together over these years. And we're very proud of what we have done. And not only that, the ideas has also led to another Czech-funded partnership project with me and my colleague, Professor William Chung. So it's almost like we work together to do Ocean Canada, and now we have the solving the sustainability challenges at the nexus of food security, climate change, and biodiversity loss as another progression in this effort to co-create knowledge for the benefit of our environment and ultimately for the benefit of Canadians and people of the world all over. So thank you very much for your attention. And Ocean Canada keeps going on, and we'll keep trying to extend this, develop this, build this further to get our goal of achieving what I've come to call Infinity Fish, which is another book, a product of Ocean Canada, where I talk about the ability of our oceans and our fisheries to give us benefit forever. If we manage them well and treat them nicely, they can continue to give us benefit forever. And anything that can give you benefit, even if it is small, year in, year out forever, the benefit is actually infinity benefit. And therefore, that's our goal. And hopefully, Ocean Canada has started us on the path to achieving infinity fish, both in Canada and around the world.
Too many slides open. All right. Sorry for that. And we get going now. So you should see the slides now. All right. Yeah, Sea Change. And William has already introduced it. Thank you so much, William, and everybody for coming, for using this your time to listen to what we have done over these years. This book is actually a kind of culmination. It's a kind of compendium of the key things we have done throughout this year's. COVID extended. It's originally a 6-year project, but with COVID and all the extensions, here we are now. We started this in 2014, so this is 10 good years that we launched the project. And this is the book. There are 50 chapters, about 50 co-authors and 4 co-editors, and you will hear from all 4 of us, the co-editors and more, as William explained to you. So I want to start with acknowledgements, really. As usual, a book is such a project. It's amazing. You start thinking and working at it, and it's more difficult than doing a paper, because a paper is a paper, but a book, and it's a collection, 50 authors. Putting it together is not easy. In general, first I want to thank the reviewers. Of course, this is a reviewed book, and both individual chapters have been reviewed, and then UBC Press, which was where we decided to sign the book to, because UBC is the host of Ocean Canada. And we say, hey, why go to another press? And meanwhile, the price is very reasonable, unlike my Infinity Fish book, which was academic press, and they charge too much. So thanks to UBC also. Then the advisory board for Ocean Canada, a really very powerful, influential, important group. They supported us from A to Z. And you can see the list. Rosemary Omar, I see she's on the call, and it's not like I was expecting it, but Rosemary, thank you very much for your guidance and support. And Rosemary took the time to read every one of these chapters and edited and commented. So, and then we have Fickrits, part of it, Christopher Harvey, a top lawyer, Vancouver lawyer, whom unfortunately we lost through COVID. May he rest in peace. Very important contributor. You will hear from our dear friend Rose Jones. And then the former Minister of Fisheries also agreed to join this. And finally, our own Dr. Gordon Monroe was very part of this and very supportive. Then we have the administration. I'm not going to call all the names. SPAC, which is the UBC office that supports big proposals like this, have been with us right from the beginning. And we took their advice, and I think that's part of the reason we won this thing. And then, of course, Melissa Pitts, she's the director of UBC Press. I remember walking into her office and telling her about this. She loves the ocean and fish. She just jumps on this. and supported us right away. And then James McNevin, he was our editor, and we thank you and your team very much. Finally, and not the least, Sheikh, the key reason that we were able to put this partnership project together, and of course, our wonderful team. We have 22 formal partners, universities, NGOs, government, First Nations. We had everybody on board, and then there were about 100 people involved at the top of this, including many students, which is one of our prize, the contribution. In terms of the whole idea of Ocean Canada, this was one of our guiding conceptual model. Essentially, you have the ocean, changes in the ocean happening, climate change and acidification, the oxygenation, all the stresses, the physics and chemistry of the ocean is changing. And obviously that will affect the life in the ocean and all of us who depend on life in the ocean one way or the other, right? So we start with the changing ocean, and then we say we're going to look at Canadian oceans in Canada, which means you have to look at Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic. And I think for Ocean Canada, that was one thing we added, the Arctic. There were many collaborative projects before, and many of almost all of them focus on the Pacific and Atlantic. We have the Arctic for obvious reasons, all the changes in climate and how that fits into the management, the stock, and the economics and so on. So this was our guiding principle. And on top of that, we created something we call the Ocean Canada Roof. That is the thing that brings our regions together, the nation together, and then, of course, you have the changing oceans are happening, and that affects the access, the availability of resources, fish to catch. That's what you want to do, and that will affect the access and therefore the governance. So we layer on our regional and national dimensions this idea of the roof, where we look at the changing ocean, the effect on access and governance. And you will hear all about this. That's the point here. So the book actually starts from changing oceans, what happens to the biophysics, and then spreads into access and changing oceans. So this is the introduction of the book I'm giving you. And my colleagues will talk to you about each of these, the sections they actually led the editing work on. And in terms of the structure of the book, there are 5 parts. In the first part, we talk about setting the stage, which is what I just talked about, the introduction. And under the introduction, we also have, under this part 1, we have reconciliation, which is what Ross Jones will talk to you about video, but he plans to join the Q&A later, so you'll hear from him directly, hopefully. Then the changing oceans, and William led the editing of that, and he will give us a summary of the work there. Access to ocean resources, that was led by Megan Bailey, and she will give us that. Then we have the governance, and this is where Derek comes in. And Derek will also talk a bit about the into the future part. And I will come back later in the wrap-up to say something about that. So that's generally the way it is. You have the key editors giving you different parts of the book, followed by the government's take on this by Nadia. And then we have Evan, who is really has been key. He was doing his PhD on OCP, and now he's flying like a serious scholar, right? I mean, so he will talk to you about the HPQ, the highly qualified personnel part of our efforts here. And I think that is what I want to say for now, and then I'll pass it on to Duncan to show us Ross Jones' video, followed by my fellow co-authors. Slowly, we will unfold this like an onion, keep going deeper as we go. So you get a good picture by the end of this. Thank you very much.
Singai La, Nang Jingwas, Hanudi Kigaga. Good day, everyone. My Haida name is Nang Jingwas. My English name is Russ Jones. I'm a citizen of the Haida Nation and live in Skidegate, a small community located on the archipelago of Haida Gwaii on the west coast of Canada. This work wouldn't have happened without the generous help of my co-authors, Nancy Doubleday, Megan Bailey, Ken Paul, Fraser Taylor, and Peter Pulsifer. As part of the Ocean Canada Partnership, we investigated the status of reconciliation of ocean issues in Canada across the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic coasts in 2 papers. Reconciliation between Indigenous people in Canada has become a major driver for changes in ocean management, including governance and resource access. Our first paper looked at the status of reconciliation. So what is reconciliation, and why is it needed for ocean activities in Canada? Nadim Rouhana is a scholar in conflict studies and transitional justice. He describes reconciliation as a process that requires a transformation of the relationship between 2 societies and must address tangible issues such as distribution of power and historical responsibility. Reconciliation is necessary because Indigenous nations were here occupying their land and ocean territories when English and French colonists established the country that we today call Canada, a short 150 years ago. True reconciliation will require major changes to the status quo. Rouhana identifies principles of truth, justice, historical responsibility, and transformation of relationships as essential for reconciliation. Margaret Moore, a professor at Queen's University, identifies 3 major injustices as a result of colonization. These are political domination, loss of territory, and cultural imposition. She recognizes that a full measure of justice to account for the impacts of loss of territory is not possible. There you have a basic description of the problem. So what is the current status of reconciliation of ocean issues? We identified 23 criteria for reconciliation based on the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP. This included the need to secure free, prior, and informed consent for developments. We looked for examples of reconciliation related to 7 ocean issues through a literature review and across 5 case studies. We examined progress in well-being, economic conditions, and self-determination of Indigenous peoples based on UNDRIP criteria. We found a few bright spots for reconciliation across Canada, including this one from the West Coast. The Haida Gwaii Marine Plan is a marine spatial plan that was approved by the Haida Nation and the province of British Columbia in 2015. It provides a roadmap for management of ocean activities in Haida Gwaii. As shown in the table, this plan partially addresses 2 of the injustices from colonization and meets 7 of the UNDRIP criteria. It didn't address the injustice related to loss of territory. Based on our scan, we note that Canada has made mixed progress towards reconciliation of ocean issues. Treaties and land claims agreements have not focused on ocean spaces and marine resources. Challenges to reconciliation include the mix of jurisdictions, diversity of Indigenous populations, and resistance to power sharing. There have been some successes, but approaches are not being applied consistently across Canada. Based on our review, we recommended develop policies for ocean issues that incorporate best practices based on the UNDRIP criteria. Apply best practices to ocean issues across Canada, and prioritize reconciliation of ocean and marine issues, and ensure that Indigenous nations have the capacity required to work as full partners in governance, policy, planning, management, and implementation.
Thanks. Next, I will talk about the Changing Oceans part of the book. This is really great to build on the previous presentation by Rashid and Chief Jones. And in here, I would like to introduce the part that of the book that titled Changing Oceans. This part of the book includes 3 chapters, and each chapter dives into the profound changes occurring in our oceans and the cascading impacts they have on ecosystems, fisheries, and communities. Canada's oceans whether they are the Pacific Oceans, the Atlantic Oceans, or the Arctic Oceans, are experiencing unprecedented changes. These changes are detailed in the chapter. Large changes in Canada's oceans and their impact on ecosystem and fisheries. And this is led by Dr. Nadia Steiner, and with co-authors with many colleagues in and outside of the Ocean Canada Partnership. As we mentioned, Dr. Steiner will be speaking momentarily, so I'm not going to steal her thunder here. Just very briefly, as a precursor, the chapter highlighted the changes that are driven by shift in oceanographic physical and chemical states over decades and across vast regions in Canada, particularly pointing to ocean warming, ocean acidification, shrinking sea ice, and increasing climate-related extreme events. These transformations influence marine ecosystems, subsistence practices of indigenous people, commercial and recreational fisheries, and the health of our oceanic and marine biodiversity. However, it is not just the oceans that are changing. It is the very fabric of the community that depend on them that is also changing as associated with that. Indigenous knowledge and scientific perspective highlight the challenges and realities faced by coastal communities, as brought out in the chapter of the book. The next chapter of this part is called Rapid Changes Across Canada's Oceans and Their Impact on Coastal Communities. It is led by Drs. Travis Tai and Dr. Juliano Velasco Abrantes, again with many colleagues within and outside of the Ocean Canada Partnership. This chapter unravels the complex interplay between the oceans and the climate. It focuses on particularly the significant changes in ocean warming, ocean acidification, but then also how these changes affect the organism through changes in metabolisms, the distributions, as well as the cascading impacts on food chains in and around the Canadian oceans. For example, ocean acidification, as a result of increased carbon dioxide uptake by the ocean, threatens calcifying organisms and disrupt marine ecosystems and the balance between the ecosystems that are important for its structure and function. Through these chapters, we also learn about the regional variability of ocean changes, highlighting the importance of bringing out the regional context in addressing ocean sustainability. These resonate the overall framework of Ocean Canada, as previously explained by Dr. Smiler. In the third chapter of this part, is called Using Multi-Scale Scenarios to Investigate the Outlook for Marine Ecosystems and Coastal Communities. It is led by Dr. Lewis Ted and myself, as well as other colleagues in the partnership. We present the use of multi-scale scenarios and modeling to produce potential outcomes for Canadian oceans and coastal communities. We focus on fisheries as a lens to investigate future impacts of climate and socio-economic change. By integrating knowledge about ocean changes with social and economic trends, the chapter outlines a framework for multi-scale scenarios that can inform sustainable marine governance. Importantly, it emphasizes the need for an integrated approach that considers the interactions and feedback between the social and ecological system, as well as the impact of natural and human drivers of change in Canada, as well as elsewhere. This approach is essential because it offers a comprehensive investigation of future ocean sustainability in Canada, addressing multidimensional drivers, socio-ecological and policy pathways, as well as across geographical scales. Overall, the part Changing Oceans of the book paints an intricate and vivid picture of the challenges we are facing. It calls upon us to recognize these changes. They are not isolated events. They are interconnected and affecting both natural and human systems and across different oceans. As you explore this chapter, you will find that the narratives presented here are not just scientific observation, but also the lived experience of communities, the voice of those who have long known the oceans and now witness their transformations, as explained by Chief Jones in his presentation. These combinations of different narrative and perspective can be found in other parts of the book as well. Overall, our oceans are changing, and understanding these events and changes, through that we hope to find a path to navigate towards a more resilient and sustainable future for all, which is also a goal of Ocean Canada Partnership. Now, I would like to pass the stage to Dr. Megan Bailey to talk about the access part of the book. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, William. And hello to everybody. Just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. I am joining you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq. I'm based at Dalhousie University. I'm going to talk about the access portion of the book. There's a number of authors that contributed chapters. You can see those names on the bottom in alphabetical order, bolded, or chapter leads. So there's 3 chapters, and geographically, these chapters do tend to cover the kind of coast to coast to coast aspect of what we were trying to accomplish in Ocean Canada Partnership. One of the things that came out of a meeting was this kind of determination of access as a cross-cutting theme. And we didn't know so much about what that meant, or how does this manifest, or what does the research program look like at that point. So Nathan Bennett led a bit of a kind of cross-country workshop and some interviews to try to understand what the issue of access looks like across Canada, and thinking about these 3 different coasts with how those access issues might manifest differently. And one thing we heard quite a lot was that the availability of resources is something that's often focused on for climate change, right? Will there be fish in the future? But availability is a necessary but not sufficient ability to benefit and use a resource, right? So yes, it needs to be there, but all kinds of other things need to be in place too. So for example, the governance and management regime needs to be there. Property rights and allocations, how are those implemented? Are there markets? Is there a human capacity to engage in the activities? Those kinds of things. So 3 case studies, or 3 different chapters were taken on in this book. So geographically, on the 6th chapter was a look at lobsters and livelihoods. So it took a look at Indigenous rights and fisheries access. And myself and Tony Charles wrote that based on the events we saw unfolding in 2020 around Sipekne'kane's launch of their treaty fisheries. In Chapter 7, Evelyn Pinkerton led a chapter on the impact of quotas on Canada's fisheries and the response of fish harvesters. And I've placed this on the West Coast, but they actually looked kind of comparatively across what happens on the West Coast, where quota fisheries are the norm, versus on the East Coast, where owner-operator, non-quota-based fisheries still exist. And then in Chapter 8, Carrie Hoover led a chapter on the role of fisheries co-management and how that type of institution can address access and allocation inequities in Eastern Nunavut. So that was a look at Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut. And the authorship of that chapter included the 3 executive directors of the co-management boards formed under land claims agreements in the Nunavut in the East. So I went back to the chapters for this just to kind of review some of the recommendations or big picture conclusions. I'm just going to briefly summarize those. But I kind of found an interesting thing that surfaced, and I don't know if it didn't surface earlier, but it just kind of resurfaced maybe in the rereading of the chapters. So in Chapter 6 on the livelihood treaty fisheries implementation, some of the recommended kind of conclusions and insights coming forward was that this idea of ministerial discretion and lack of leadership to implement the Marshall Decision is unacceptable. So 25 years ago yesterday, the Supreme Court found that Donald Marshall Jr. did have a treaty-protected, constitutionally recognized right to fish, to earn an income from, he happened to be fishing eel, but from fish and from hunting and gathering from the land. So 25 years later, it's just unacceptable how little progress is being made. Current governance does not align with the spirit and the intent of the Peace and Friendship Treaties, with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Act that Canada passed, I believe, in 2021, as well as the Modernized Fisheries Act that was revised in 2019. So there are treaties, there's legislation in place, and the governance is not aligning with what those tell us we should be doing. And of course, the space for First Nations governance and management models. And Russ made that point on his slide about full partnership and ensuring that that full partnership is there and recognized and respected. In Lynn's chapter, they were focusing on neoliberal ideology and the ways that quota prioritization sacrifices harvesters and communities and does so in favor of investors and corporations. And that this latter model of owner-operator fisheries that aren't quota-based offers for more equitable distribution amongst commercial harvesters. And then part of their recommendations moving forward was to develop alternative approaches that don't glorify the idea of commodification and consolidation in our fisheries. And then the chapter that Carrie Hoover led, there was some recommendations there around how the minister responds to recommendations made by these co-management boards. They put a lot of time and work into the recommendations they make, and the minister is supposed to respond, and they're asking for a substantial response that matches the substance of what they've put into the work for their own recommendations. And again, this idea of honoring spirit and intent of what the land claims were a part of, which they all have efforts or words in there about encouraging Inuit self-reliance. And again, governance models aren't recognizing that. And then thirdly, to think through how new fishing opportunities could be used as measures to provide more equitable allocation and access. So for example, the Atlantic cod fishery, small fishery just opened again. That would have been a great opportunity to give all that allocation to Inuit harvesters, for example. So what I did think about, though, when I was reading these chapters was like, actually, Derek, all of these recommendations are really linked heavily to governance, right? And the work that you led and that Evan was strongly involved in as well. And so I think that flow in the book is a really positive one. To think through that really, really tight link and coupling between what we study in access and the way overarching governance regimes have major implications for that. The book happens to have a really heavy fisheries focus. So I just wanted to also put in a little plug that it's not just fisheries access, of course, even though that's what's highlighted in the book. And one of my colleagues, Hannah Harrison, who's also with Marine Affairs at Dalhousie, has a right-of-way podcast and a coastal access project. And she's looking really much more about physical access to coastal areas, to beach access, to wharfs, et cetera. So I think we do need to think really broadly about access when we think about what that means for Canada from coast to coast to coast. Thank you very much. I will turn it over to Derek now.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Megan. And I just want to acknowledge that I am located, and my university is located on the traditional territories of the Neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people, and that's on the Haldimand Tract, which is land granted to Six Nations, 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, which is here in southern Ontario, a long way away from the oceans, but we're very much connected in many different ways. So absolutely, like Megan was saying, with related to access, the whole issues around governance were also very much a cross-cutting issue and theme. And in the Ocean Canada Partnership, we understood governance in many, many different ways. Given we were a large partnership, people coming at it from very different perspectives and lenses, government, from a government angle, from a researcher angle, NGO angle, so on and so forth. So lots of different ways of thinking about governance. But ultimately, I think what we were trying to do is understand how governance arrangements, these actor networks that we're all a part of, the rules and the rule-making systems that we're a part of that are kind of here to help us steer us in directions, hopefully, that lead to better social and ecological outcomes. How do we get them to better fit these changing ocean situations, and also issues around changing access? And as Megan said, there's so much connections between a lot of these chapters. So I'm just going to very briefly hit the highlights on some of the things that emerged from the work. And in total, we had about four chapters that took this more explicit governance focus with a very diverse set of 24 co-authors, including the community of Chesterfield Inlet and Nunavut. Proud to say that 3 of these chapters, like many others in the book, were led by some brilliant early career researchers, all of whom are contributing to sustainability of our oceans and coast now and in an ongoing way. And that includes Evan Andrews, who you're going to hear from soon, Sandra Eager, and also Cecilia Angler. So thanks to them for leading these. The chapters all offer a very rich set of reflections and kind of these multi-level perspectives with sort of a place-based kind of orientation, connecting to communities, but also thinking about what does it mean for us as a country at the federal level about how we're going to approach these challenges moving forward. And I also think there's a lot of good theory in this book, and also so good empirical perspectives. And I'm a firm believer that the good theory and equals good practice. So I think a lot of the chapters across the whole book really reflect that in many different ways. So there were 4 chapters, and I guess one of the first chapter, really chapter 9 of the book, really draws on experiences from the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic to really explore this idea of how do we engage in transformative change. And we had examples from Nova Scotia and central BC coast and Chesterfield Inlet as well, and really considers how do communities proactively foster change and deliberately engage in some of these transformations we know we need to participate in for the well-being of coastal communities and also for the ecology of our oceans and coasts as well. And so some of the things that emerged from these different contexts were the importance of incentives, the importance of awareness, rebuilding institutional networks. So as Megan said, our governance models and our institutions can support the types of access arrangements that are needed and required. A willingness to take some risks, as well as a real importance of the role of evidence and different knowledges that are so crucial in this. And that's one of the really interesting experiences from the Port Bethune case in Nova Scotia, where they really highlighted this fascinating community science process they went through to engage in this lobster aquaculture dynamic as well. So really good stuff from that chapter. But the core message, I think, ultimately is that a more systemic and a relational approach is going to be needed if we're going to transform some of our governance systems to better fit these realities that we're a part of. And so the chapter really brings out how coastal communities have so much capacity to do that if properly supported and if we build on that knowledge base. So scalability of these things, of course, is an issue, but the lessons are absolutely there. The next chapter is all about knowledge co-production and rebuilding, and that was led by Evan Andrews. And it narrows the focus for us to the importance of this idea of knowledge co-production as a foundation for some of the new requirements to develop rebuilding plans for Canada's fish stocks. And so this idea of knowledge co-production, this terminology is becoming more ubiquitous, and it's really the blending of different types and sources of knowledge together. And clearly rebuilding is a space where that is really needed. And so with reference to northern shrimp and with Pacific herring, among other species, the chapter points in some really pragmatic ways, I think, to the role of knowledge co-production in helping to set objectives for rebuilding, because, of course, there's ecological objectives, but there are social objectives attached to that as well. Helping to identify how we might go about developing broad-spectrum indicators that reflect diverse knowledges, how co-production lens as well can inform our current consultative and advisory processes. So lots of really pragmatic lessons emerging from this chapter. But it does come with a reminder that our regulatory frameworks don't necessarily support knowledge co-production in this way. And yes, changes in the Fisheries Act have been important, but lots of work to do in this space as well. So less about that. The next chapter, chapter 11, was all about integrated management and looking for bright spots across Canada. And this was led by Sandra Eager. And again, brings us back to a bit more of a bird's eye view, but still a very grounded perspective on these bright spots across 7 different sets of experiences in Canada, from the Musquash Estuary out east all the way out to Guayanas, as Chief Russ Jones had talked about as well. So the challenges with integrated management are definitely recognized in the chapter, but they do point to a series of constructive lessons that came out of the analysis, which I think are really valuable. One, for example, is recognizing how important many non-governmental organizational actors are and have been in supporting and catalyzing really good integrated management practices. And that's something we need to perhaps amplify. Understanding that integrated management is clearly not a linear process, and that there's lots of different pathways and experiences associated with it and directions to get to the kind of outcomes we want with that. And despite, though, innovative practices being out there, some of those electoral cycles, the legislative process being linked to those electoral cycles, has impeded the scalability and evolution of some of these bright spots. So some really good news stories, but a recognition that we have some work to do. And again, ultimately, the chapter kind of calls for this whole of governance or whole of society approach, really, and making nice connections to access issues, to knowledge co-production issues, and so on, to encourage integrated management efforts. But again, the chapter reminds us that we have been, as a country, a real leader in this integrated management space, and that we have more to do as well. Seeking learning places that we've been engaging with. And then the last governance-oriented chapter that I'll mention, it really takes us into this, as Rashid said, a more future-oriented perspective. Starts to examine the capacity of Canada's legal and policy frameworks for selected ocean sectors to integrate climate change considerations. And this chapter was led by Cecilia Angler. It explores multiple sectors, so depending on what your interests are, renewable energy, species at risk, fisheries management, aquaculture, lots of different things. And so whether Canada's oceans laws and policies are ready for climate change, as the chapter points out, is a very nuanced, requires a nuanced answer. But there is evidence of process, which is good. They point out for example, the risk-based assessments on biological systems and coastal infrastructure that have emerged, the ongoing work to incorporate climate change considerations in the stock assessments, and some of this ministerial discretion as well that gives a little bit of flexibility to respond as climate changes and other issues emerge, as William had highlighted as well. Again, the chapter, though, concludes with an important reminder. Yes, there's much to be commended with regard to our progress towards oceans management under climate change, but Oceans Act implementation is still incomplete. And so there's a dire need to pick up the pace if we're going to meet some of these future ocean challenges. So again, lots of great lessons and perspectives emerging from this chapter. So across the 4 chapters, lots of cross-fertilization of ideas, links to other sections of the book, as Megan highlighted. Although it's organized across these themes, it's really this integrated perspective that continues to emerge that the book really elevates. And I just want to end then by thanking all the chapter leads and the co-authors and collaborators that contributed to the governance chapters. Editing chapters, organizing teams to write together is a time-consuming and challenging task. And so really hugely appreciated contributions from all those that were involved. So thanks very much. And I think I turn it over to Nadia.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen as well. And okay, so that doesn't. There we go. Okay. Thanks very much. And as William indicated, I'm a research scientist with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And as a government scientist, like my research is driven very much by the mandate to DFO, which includes to assess and understand climate change impacts on aquatic ecosystems, expand climate vulnerability work to better inform marine conservation planning and management, and work with Indigenous partners to better integrate Indigenous knowledge into planning and policy decisions. These are all components that have been addressed within Ocean Canada and in the book. So my expertise is in developing climate models, analyzing climate models, and the chapter I was involved with is the Changing Oceans chapter. And there we highlighted quite nicely, like mostly building on projections of the previous coupled model into comparison project version 5. What I'm showing here are from the 6th version, so CNEP 6. But the results are essentially the same. What we're seeing are strong changes in temperature and stratification, strong increases. We're seeing like the past is on the left, and then in the middle we see a less intense scenario, and then a high emission scenario. That's how we usually look at these projections, is depending on how much emissions we put in the ocean and other components. We see decreasing oxygen levels, a strong decrease in pH, which means ocean acidification. So we have increased ocean acidification. We have a loss of sea ice. What we are seeing now with in recent years is that the very high emission scenarios are deemed much less likely. They are still probable, but unlikely. So it's more those middle scenarios that we are focusing these days on as like a potentially expected change. In addition to these ocean environmental changes, we have changes in ocean usage, land use, agriculture, coastal development, erosion, pollution. So there's a lot of components that drive the changes in the ocean and the ocean ecosystems. If you kind of look at just like individuals, like what I wanted to highlight here, those are just like temperature for 3 regions in the Arctic, and it's time series from 1980 to 100. And I'm showing here different models because what we often use, like we use Earth system models to do these projections. These are developed by many nations across the world. And then if you look at them all individually, we see that they really, they're fairly close in where we are right now, but they still diverge quite intensely over time. So we see that we have an increased model uncertainty over time, but we also see that increase in temperature, of course. And we also see, if we look closer and look at the trends and the pace of change, we see that we're having an increase of the pace of change over time. So all these changes, these models, we can then use to drive species distribution models. And in the book, we show changes in fisheries. This is another example that's more recently developed, building on the discussions on the work in Ocean Canada that looks at ringed seals and how they move based on different habitat preferences for sea ice and open water and bathymetry. That we kind of see a general movement of the main habitat towards this area in the central Canadian Arctic Ocean that's referred to as the last ice area. So all these things have socioeconomic impacts. They are unavoidable. And that's across the Arctic, both for species as well as the people in the group. So one of the things that are really important that has been highlighted quite intensely in the book is that need for co-production of knowledge, the collaboration with Indigenous groups and other and non-Indigenous communities. So building on the Ocean Canada collaborations that we have developed and mechanisms that we have developed, we have a student now leading a project that works with the Indigenous community of Wulalhaqtaq to merge Indigenous traditional knowledge and academic science tools in this co-production of knowledge approach. So essentially, we developed this traditional knowledge calendar that highlights the appearance of species, the harvesting timings and mechanisms, and how they link to the environmental conditions. This is specific for one community, but the technology or the idea behind it can be transferred to other communities, and we are actually in the process of doing that for other communities in the Canadian Arctic. And I also wanted to highlight that in that context, reiterating things that are in the Sea Change book on reconciliation, the recent Indigenous Resilience Report highlighted that Indigenous knowledge systems and lived experiences are essential components of climate action. So this is kind of one component where we try to integrate that and move this forward. So we're essentially using this calendar that we've developed for the current times and then use model predictions of environmental conditions, look at those, help, and then identify how this changes this traditional knowledge view, this traditional knowledge calendar. And then we can go back in the community and discuss with them how these changes in their harvesting mechanisms will impact the community and how they see these changes. So this is really just one other example of how this collaboration and co-development that has been developed as part of Ocean Canada and is described in the Sea Ice book can continue into the future. So to address the question that we wanted to do with this book, can we chart a sustainable future for the oceans in Canada? What we are seeing in the Changing Oceans chapter is that changes are profound and they are accelerating, particularly in the Arctic, which means that there is an urgency to act. And we've already heard before that a lot of the action is too slow. So we really have to speed up action. The multifaceted issues spanning natural environment, society, and economy require a transdisciplinary approach. There's been a lot of progress through Ocean Canada. I think it's really a great example of how this can be achieved and what needs to be involved to achieve that. There have been many advances in climate projections, climate models, species distribution models. We have much improved understanding of past and expected future changes. the uncertainties in the scenario of the future emissions are reduced. Like we have like a lower range of expected futures. However, there are still significant model uncertainties, which really mean we need to understand individual processes that we can then use to develop parameterizations in these models. So there's some progress on that. Reconciliation approaches include the need for indigenous research collaborations and leadership, knowledge co-production, like the merging of indigenous traditional knowledge with academic sciences, and also revisiting indigenous views of reciprocal relationships between humans and nature, which then impact conservation and adaptation. So there is progress there as well, but also very slow, as Chief Jones has also highlighted. So in summary, like extensive environmental changes and multiple worldviews require transformative governance, revisiting laws and governance structures with a critical eye and from different viewpoints, including indigenous rights perspectives, and communicating those to the public. And that's what Derek was just nicely highlighting before. And that's it from my side.
Thank you, Nadia. So next, we have Dr. Evan Andrews to talk about his perspective. Thanks, Nadia, and please.
Thank you so much. Seeing y'all can hear me. Good. So hello, everyone. My name is Evan Andrews. I'm a Banting postdoctoral researcher at Memorial University, whose campuses are situated in the territories of diverse indigenous groups, including the Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit. I'm a very proud first author of a chapter in Sea Change, one of the many, many opportunities created for early career researchers, and ones that were central to research and leadership development for me and many. There were a lot of students and postdocs that Rashid indicated that came through the project. So it's tough to kind of think across all those people and what their experiences are. So I'll just share mine. I have been pre-promoting the book, not just because I'm in the product, but what it means as part of a longer process, especially to early career researchers. And I'm going to share today 3 reflections of being part of that process, including how those can help us think about, how to continue the conversation towards charting a sustainable future for oceans in Canada. And the first one is about co-developing or co-development. So through the Ocean Canada Partnership, folks like me learned a lot about what it takes to start conversations and collaborations with different people around the table. We learned there's always a need for more voices, but also the importance to think about what that table needs to look like to bring everybody together and ultimately meet the challenges of sustainability, which is what this book is about in a sense from my standpoint. From an early career perspective, co-development isn't just about the research or a research product, but it's about us. It's about our experiences, our personal and professional development. My fisheries and oceans journey began in the Ocean Canada Partnership, and I am proud of that start. And you can imagine all of the development that has happened since that time, which isn't done by one person alone. It does take a co to support good personal and leadership development of early career researchers, and I'm really grateful to everybody for that. The second reflection is about good experiences. So when people pick up Sea Change, they ought to know the great excitement and sense of purpose that went into it. And leading up to the book, there were so many wonderful experiences for me. I remember Lynn Pinkerton caught me in a break between sessions at one OCP conference and said, "You're always smiling." Well, I'm not always smiling, but she caught me in a moment as I was moving from one session to the other, reflecting and feeling grateful for the opportunities to speak and to be heard in a large group setting. Something that Dr. Rosemary Omer said during a panel that we put together, which was about what to do with all of the things that need to be done for everybody to be involved. And she said, do what makes you satisfied. And that has been the driving force for me as I keep moving through the ups and downs of being at the early parts of my career. And I'm so lucky to have worked with, Dr. Derek Armitage during my time in OCP, and now with Dr. Ratana Chempegdi, who both make a lot of space for me to do what makes me satisfied, where I can be free to be me and contribute the ways that I can and I'm learning to do. It drives the relationship in the context of these kinds of networks, and has certainly driven my experiences, and good ones at that, in OCP. We need all different kinds of early career researchers to come together to chart sustainable ocean futures, and networks like OCP can create that space, even if some university departments cannot. So when people pick up this book and look at it, I hope they talk about it and create good experiences and conversations on their own among free and supported people, including early career researchers, since this is necessary to create common ground so we can work together for co-development. And this will certainly happen in the classes that I'm now teaching, as the book and the process that went into it will become indispensable resources for nurturing future generations of ocean research leaders. My final reflection is about togetherness, or being together. And as you've heard, this book should demonstrate that we cannot chart sustainable and just ocean futures alone. And there is a great opportunity for research to provide the language and support the knowledge outcomes that give people new ideas about how to talk, build capacity, and explore together ocean possibilities, especially from justice and governance standpoints. And from my perspective, relationships that were developed during OCP last with me to this day, and along the way have led to important inputs into the conversation about sustainable ocean futures, including related to, what kind of training and supports are needed for early career researchers, and also what kind of topics should be in the conversation. And as a result, OCP folks, including many on this call and driven by early career researchers, came together to explore small-scale fisheries in Canada, which is the biggest thing that I do, and resulted in one of the most comprehensive looks of what they might be and how they're doing and what we need to do to work together to co-develop knowledge about them. So when you pick up this book, it should not only be about picking up the product, but picking up the process, including where it left off and where it's going to go, so we can, co-develop good experiences together on our way to charting just and sustainable futures for Canada's oceans. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Evan. That's a wonderful way of concluding the list of the series of presentations about the book. And thank you for all the speakers for the really excellent highlights of the different components of the book and different perspectives. So now we will open up to questions from the audience or comments. If you have any questions, please identify who you want to respond to. You can post the questions on the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we can let you answer the questions directly. So there's I see questions from Keith Morton. Is posted on the chat box. So the question is to Nadia. Very curious about Nadia's perspective on how we can tangibly accelerate the action in partnership with DFO. So Nadia, do you want to respond to that, please?
Good. As I indicated before, I'm providing perspective from the government science part, and I think what we've highlighted here is really that collaboration And for within DFO, I think a lot that we can do from the research side is providing concise policy briefs that identify these the importance of the steps, emphasizing that the positive outcome from the collaborations that we have been doing. I think that's about where our influence ends, and then it depends on the policy. So I think what we can do is emphasizing and communicating the need for action and the science behind it, the knowledge that is supporting that need. I think that's probably what I can say to this.
Thank you so much. I think the same can also be turned into questions about how we can accelerate the co-development of knowledge, as well as collaboration in the governance with First Nation and Indigenous community. I see Chief Jones has joined in, and maybe it's also a good opportunity for him to give interventions and maybe provide a perspective about this line of thinking. Thanks, Nadia.
Yeah, sorry, I was joined late. Yeah, I think we did lay out in chapter 14 kind of some of the actions that are needed to address some of the past injustices that First Indigenous peoples in Canada have experienced. A lot of it has to do with policy changes, and then also constructive engagement, with the Indigenous governance groups. So there were certainly some significant progress is being made, and there's many best practice examples, but they're not being applied across in the different regions. So we're learning more about what works, but it's not necessarily being applied in other regions. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. While you're here, Megan has a question for you. So please, Megan.
Thanks. Yeah, Russ, I was just curious about the UNDA Act, and if you found, because we worked on those chapters, you led those chapters before that act had been put in place, and so we're relying fully on UNDRIP and not kind of Canada's interpretation of it. But I'm just curious if you've seen any difference since UNDA was passed in terms of the relationship with the federal government, or if that seems to be leading any of the ways that they're partnering with the Haida Nation. Oh, you're muted, Russ.
I'm not that involved in the political discussions with the Haida Nation. I'll just note that there was recently the announcement that the province of British Columbia had recognized Haida title to approximately the up 2/3 of Haida Gwaii is significant, right? And also it doesn't affect private holdings. But it accounts for 98.3% of the land in Haida Gwaii and there's a transition over 2 years. Whether that's a result of UNDA, right, or more, that's a federal legislation. This was a provincial decision, right, and it would be exciting to see the response of the federal government to that for Haida Gwaii and how it may affect First Nations negotiations in other areas.
Thank you.
Thanks. Derek, please.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to sort of circle back to one of the earlier sort of questions about partnerships, and then Nadia's really good point about policy briefs and new ways of communicating. And one of the chapters actually that we didn't explicitly mention, I thought it was a good chance to mention it now, towards the end of the book, it was led by Vincent Hurreau, It's all about the role of participatory video and really engaging communities in some new ways, and also being able to communicate the voices and concerns of communities to audiences in a different way as well. And so one of the lessons from that chapter is the role of participatory video as one strategy. But I think it speaks to this idea of communications, of building those collaborations in some innovative ways. And that's part of, I think, our task, is to think a little bit more creatively, especially inside academia, how we can engage others and make sure those voices are heard. So I just wanted to highlight that chapter as well as one of those that from the book and from a group of scholars and practitioners that are thinking about that particular challenge also.
Thanks, Eric.
William, can I add something there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good that you touch on that. I was planning to also talk about that in the wrap up. So it's good you brought it. That you're talking about chapter, what is it? Chapter 13, is it? Yeah, chapter 13 in the book, and it's worth reading. And it was led by Vincent Laurent, and contributors Natalie, Hilary, Ian, and Eric Solomon. These are the people who worked on this. A.M. Morrow was a professor. He actually is a movie making professor, documentary guy. He was at University of not Winnipeg, Manitoba, University of Winnipeg, I think. They're two there, right? And he led this. And then the thing is, we emphasize a lot communication, exactly because of what Derek and the question was alluding to. Because if you can do the best research, if it's sitting in the journals, how many people will see it? So this communication was very important. You could see we made over 500 presentations, talked to people in Canadian Parliament, or we've been on video just to get the information. And another aspect of our work is the involvement of NGOs. We had Oceana, we had EcoTrust, and these are people really in the trenches trying to get the government of Canada and businesses to do the right thing as it relates to both the natural and social aspects of oceans. And so, yes, the project tried to be very comprehensive, not just do the research itself, but get it over and pass it on to the public and people who can actually make good use of the resource as a way to catalyze action. Yeah. Thank you.
And thanks, Rashid. So maybe, Evan, I like your intervention a lot. And we also have quite a lot of early career colleagues who are participating in this webinar. So maybe could you provide like some additional advice on what do you think like the most important thing that they think, for example, for students who are starting to work on projects that are related to the oceans, that your advice to them in based on the experience from Ocean Canada?
Yeah, might be hang out with people like Rashid and William and Megan and Derek, and there's many here. No, seriously, I think it's really important to engage in these bigger processes, bigger conversations, not to stay so stuck in our little box, our own project, and try to keep open to many things going on. Those are going to be all the sorts of people and ideas and targets for our work. And so we need to learn how to look out for them and to engage in conversation with all sorts of different people. You might end up, although probably not to the skill level of Vincent and Ian, you might end up making a video or doing a podcast as Hannah Harrison does, as Megan mentioned. You might end up maybe even working in the spaces that you're planning to criticize from your research. And so you ought to know how those things work if you can find out. And that often requires talking to people and spending that extra time to learn about them. So reach out, join the conversation, and sometimes you have to make your own space to lead. So whether there's no space for you, you don't see it, you can create opportunities, bringing people together, having conversations, writing and promoting your own work. All of these things are about the dialogue that needs to happen, and we all deserve to be in it. Thank you.
So, William,
It's great.
yeah, everyone, thank you very much. I mean, your contribution even today is just stellar, as always, right? I mean, the points you made and this advice you've given, I think is very pertinent now after COVID. I usually don't care where people sit to do their work. I mean, this is the academy, right? But one of the things I notice is students just don't want to come to the office. Some of them, some do, because it's fine, it's convenient, right? You sit to your house and you do. But frankly speaking, not coming out and mixing with your fellow students and everybody else you can get to interact with, I think it's not a good thing, frankly speaking. When you go for your tea or coffee and you meet somebody, that little chat can lead to something. So I know there are a number of students and early career people here. I just thought to follow what you just said so that I can make this point. One other point, I see Rosemary, you are online. You gave us a lot of advice on how to do interdisciplinary work. And I remember one of the first things you said is, when you come to a workshop or a meeting of interdisciplinary scholars, she said, we should put a basket at the door. So you just drop your ego at the door before you come into the room. You should come in with open mind, be ready to share and listen. Where you started before the meeting could change completely by the time you leave, right? Because of the impulses. Rosemary, you want to give us a few words of wisdom, please?
Mute my audio. There we go. I'm really so excited to listen and watch and hear all the things that are growing out of what's been happening. I started way back with my own PhD, which actually looked at access to fisheries all that long time ago. And I realized with the collapse of the cod in 1992 that I needed a scientist. I could not understand what was going on. And the knowledge I would hand on now, and Evan, thank you, you warm the cockles of my heart listening to you. I just remember always that all knowledge is contexted. There's the knowledge you bring, but there's also the knowledge that if you have the will to do it, you can hear. And it's always important to follow your passion, but go beyond that. Because that's the real excitement is in pushing your own boundaries, because it will open your eyes, and in the process, it will open other people's eyes and ears. Rashid, that's all. You give me joy to just watch what's happening here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all your help and support with your advisory board. I don't see Gordon online, but okay. Over to you, William.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's a remarkable. I think wrapping up these discussion sessions, I think is lots of really good thoughts expressed. And maybe I will pass it to you, Rashid, to do the wrap up of the whole event.
So actually we've covered it well. You've seen you now have insights into the book, but these are really summaries. And if you really want to get to it, just get the book, and they're all forms you can. And thanks to UBC Press, the price is reasonable. It's not those crazy $200 prices, So, and essentially, you had the various parts and some of the things we came up with. What I'm going to do now is just to give you a few bullet points. This is in chapter 15, where we really summarize and we ask the question, so what? We've done all this, so what? And in each chapter, you have a so what section. And in chapter 15, we actually summarize them so that If anything, you read chapter 1 and chapter 15, that will take you far, and then you can dig into the details. But the few points we agreed on together in a collaborative fashion was the understanding that we need to all work together diligently to ensure that we conserve our coast and our oceans, and make them sustainable. We encourage sustainable use. And then we also need to achieve reconciliation with indigenous partners. We need to reimagine nation-to-nation relationships in order for us to be able to take really the kind of care we need to take of our oceans and the people who depend on them and their relationship. We also need to prioritize the well-being of coastal communities in general, but especially of indigenous communities because of all that you've heard, the history of Canada, who was here hundreds of years, centuries before any of the other people like us started appearing. And so the well-being of indigenous people and coastal communities should be fundamental, and you see elements of this in all the chapters. Finally, we thought about strengthening and further supporting the diverse knowledge foundations required to be able to do this. We really need to open up. This is the thing about interdisciplinarity. There is no one group or one way or one discipline that has all the solutions. That is why you need to look for knowledge and impulses, insights from all sorts of sources. This year, I had the privilege of being asked to give a keynote at the European Association of Environmental Economists, and the room was 800 economists. Can you imagine that? And you know what the title of my talk was? I said the title is the title was Bringing Indigenous and Granny Wisdom into Environmental Economics. And all that was trying to just open up. You can't just say all that matters is to maximize profit. There are other things that we care about the ocean, which the profit doesn't really deal with and actually messes up with. And so this bringing in diverse knowledge foundations is crucial. And this was all that I want to say in the summary. The rest is to thank you all. In fact, the early career part of this project was very important. SHEC really cares about that. Half of our budget all went to support students, postdocs, and our meetings and so on. And we're grateful for that because that is the future. That is the future. The training of new scholars in this field is fundamental for the world to be able to really take care of our ocean and therefore take care of us, because the ocean is our life in so many ways. So I would like to just end up by thanking you all for making the time, the participation, OCP team, wonderful experience, learned a lot. And we are carrying this over to the project that William is PI and I'm co-PI in what that is a solving FCB, food, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Bravo. Thanks to everybody and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.